Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I'm a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph. Apropos of nothing, I just published a book called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. It is available on Amazon for pre-order, so check it out. All kinds of good things, great things, the best of things. And this is Pints with Aquinas. And in this episode, we're going to talk about lying, because I had a debate with Janet Smith on the channel about lying, and I thought it was a really fruitful exchange, and I've thought about it more since then. So I thought I'd just kind of give like a kind of distilled version of the opening argument as it came together in the context of that debate, and then as it'll help us to guide our own moral decision making. So here we go. Okay, so lying. The principle is thou shalt not bear false witness, which would be the 8th commandment. And we are, receiving that scriptural teaching and then thinking through that scriptural teaching in concert with the church's tradition. So a lot of stuff comes to us from St. Augustine and then St. Thomas Aquinas, and then there are other kind of modern sources besides. So when St. Thomas, for instance, talks about lying, he talks about it as something opposed to truth, all right, or truthfulness, you might render it in that way, which for him is just a part of justice. So when he talks about justice, he divides these like little virtues that fall under justice into two main categories. He says there are like these virtues which concern obedience, or like giving somebody who's superior to you in some way what they're due. Okay, so that'd be like religion, when you give God what's his due, and that'd be like piety, when you give your parents and country what they're due, or obedience, when you give your superior what he or she is due. And then there are other virtues which are like less easy to pin down, but he calls them like virtues of civility, or maybe Father Romano Cesario calls them virtues of civility. But these would be things like liberality, to be generous, and other things like, let's see, vindication, whereby you redress wrongs, or gratitude, whereby you give thanks. And it's in this category that we find truthfulness, whereby you give others the truth, okay? So when we're talking about truthfulness, we're talking about something that is due to another human being, by virtue of the fact that they are a human being, all right? So they're the types of things like generosity, liberality, gratitude, etc., truth, without which society simply cannot flourish, okay? So it's the kind of bedrock of society, because if everyone were to lie to each other in society, society would crumble, all right? We would all be suspicious of each other. We'd just go around, sneaking here and there, and then suspect everyone else of trying to manipulate us or control us. Yikes, sounds a little bit like what we're experiencing now. Crazy. All right, so then it's in this setting that St. Thomas encourages us, based on the scriptural teaching and the tradition that he inherits from St. Augustine, to speak the truth. So then what is truth? I will read. Truth ensures that our externals, namely words and deeds, are duly ordered in relation to something as a sign to a thing signified. So it ensures that what we say and what we do is ordered towards what we actually have in our heart, what we actually have in our mind, and that the signs which we project, right, the signs which we communicate, actually correspond to what is interior, all right? So St. Thomas gives two main reasons as to why we ought to speak the truth, abide in the truth. Basically, this is what, this is what our mouths and this is what our bodies are for communicating the truth. So we're given these faculties for the purpose of communicating with them. And were we to communicate with them poorly, right, that would kind of undermine the very faculties themselves and the use thereof. So this is kind of like a variation on the perverted faculty argument, which you sometimes hear in debates about same-sex marriage. And then the other one is just the place that they occupy with respect to the common good. And I kind of gestured towards that because if everyone lied to each other, right, then you'd have serious problems, which is what we have. Okay, so lying is condemned as a vice, contrary to the truth, and therefore sinful. So then what is a lie? Well, it's something contrary to the truth, which we just defined. So it's when you say what you think to be false so as to deceive another person. All right, so you say what you think to be false in order to deceive another human being. And St. Thomas says that there are two main reasons why it is sinful. Because it's unnatural, all right? So it's against the natural orientation of speech acts, right? Speech acts which are ordered to communication. So there are lots of reasons for which you can use your faculty of speech. But in these particular acts where you're trying to communicate with another human being, it's foretelling the truth, and lying is contrary to that principal use, all right? And, spoilers, right? It undermines the common good. So in St. Thomas's estimation, lies are always evil. Okay? Lies are always evil. So a lie is never permissible, which is a tall order. Okay? So lies are always evil. So he says, like, basically you can't get going with a lie, right? There's nothing there that can become good because it's bad from the start. It's a rotten egg. So it would be like an example of what you sometimes hear referred to as intrinsically evil acts. Okay, it's actually really in the meditation upon lying that this line of thought is developed in the church's tradition. So it can't be used to a good end. So if you say like, hey, I lied, sure, yeah, right, but I did it for a great end, like to protect the Jews in my basement, for instance. Yeah. So you can't do evil that good may come. That is also St. Paul, scriptural teaching. Okay. And this is, framed in, like I said, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas. It's also present in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. There's some debate about how it's framed in the present catechism. But there was like a little kind of gesture towards a softening of the teaching, and that was removed. And some people are like, well, it was there, but also it was removed. So there you go. Okay. Three main kinds of lies that St. Thomas identifies. Malicious lies are to hurt somebody, okay? Whether to hurt them, to hurt their reputation, to undermine their friendships, whatever it might be, right? This is the worst kind. This is a grave matter. And these are the worst kind of lies. And then he lists like what he calls jocose lies, which are basically like making fun of somebody by lying or poking, I don't know, like being like overly ironic or being overly like scornful, as it were, or blah, blah, blah. Many ways in which one can commit a jocose lie. I would actually affirm, or I would say that jokes, straightforwardly, that aren't at the expense of somebody in a kind of malicious way, that these aren't lies because they're a speech act, which is meant, to make somebody laugh. And part of that speech act, part of the genre of that speech act is like a little deception, but the deception is not the type of deception with which one lies like a malicious lie or a kind of classic jocose lie. So I'm not trying to mislead you. I'm just trying to cause a kind of what would you say? Like a humorous recognition. So it's like, knock, knock, who's there? Orange. Orange who? Orange, you glad I didn't say? Whatever, how that thing goes. I don't remember, obviously, because I spoiled the joke without actually having gone through however many number of bananas you have to go through. Okay. So I wouldn't say that a joke is a jocose lie. I would say that a jocose lie is a kind of like mirthful lie, but which actually meant to like undo somebody, right? It's meant to in some way, shape, or form, cause somebody discomfiture. Okay. And then officious lies. So these are the types of lies that you tell to help somebody, and a lot of the debate centers on officious lies. Boom. So typically you would say that when it comes to grave matter, malicious lies are grave matter and they therefore qualify as mortal sin, and then jocose and officious lies are light matter and therefore do not qualify. And so the big question, which we'll spend the rest of our time together on, is this Gestapo question. Some have said that if you're in 1944 Low Countries and you're harboring Jews in your basement or in your attic or wherever, and a member of the Gestapo or the Einsatzgruppen comes to your door and knocks and says, do you have Jews in your basement? Some people will go so far as to say that you are morally bound to lie, that it would be evil were you not to lie, which is, in terms of the history of moral theology, a kind of novum, right? This is a new thing, but a lot of people now seem to think that that is the case, all right? At the very least, they seem to think that it's excusable, that it's not sinful. I'm going to defend the harder position, the traditional position, which is that it is not licit in these circumstances to lie, and that it would still be sinful were you to lie. It would be venially sinful, okay? And mind you, a venial sin is a sin like per accidens, all right? So sin in the strict sense is mortal sin. Venial sin is with reference to mortal sin insofar as it can dispose to mortal sin, insofar as many venial sins, when tolerated and heaped up upon each other, might take you down the path of mortal sin. But like strictly speaking, St. Thomas says that venial sin is only sin with reference to mortal sin. It's only sin per accidens, okay? So the basic idea here is you can't do evil that good may come, all right? Regardless of how our 21st century sensibilities seem to dictate on the matter, all right? Because I don't think that our moral intuitions are always good, but more on that later. Okay, so St. Augustine, when posed with a very similar question, he says, what, kill the soul for the body? The mouth that lies slays the soul. Wait, I have to lie, right? So I have to incur sin in order that somebody doesn't die? He says, no, right? Like John Henry Newman will say, I should prefer the annihilation of the entire world to a single mortal sin. That is wild in terms of affirmations, but you see where they're getting at. The difference between a kind of natural evil and then, an evil that obtains in the supernatural order, right? Or like an evil of fault versus an evil of punishment. So yeah, in the debate with Janet Smith, we touched on like other instances of evils that one might commit in order to obtain the good end. And we talked specifically about apostasy. Like, what if somebody asks, are you Christian? Can I lie about that? And she seemed open to the prospect that maybe you could. Whereas to me, that's kind of straightforwardly impossible, because you can never be permitted to deny the Lord Jesus, because that's apostasy. And there's no differentiating between what you say as a confession of faith and then what you harbor in your heart as belief. There is a differentiation insofar as one is external and one is internal, but the two are wed, right? Like body and soul. So I think that we need to hold them together in our moral evaluation. So yeah, we couldn't, steal things in order to obtain a good end. We couldn't commit adultery in order to obtain a good end. We couldn't apostatize in order to obtain a good end, nor ought we to lie. All right, so my basic kind of instinct on this is that it's a venial sin. Okay, so it's not a mortal sin. It's a sin analogically so called. My go-to example is that a mortal sin is like a car wreck, whereas a venial sin is like a detour. Okay, so it inhibits your attainment of the end or disposes contrarily, but it doesn't replace the end in the way that a mortal sin does. All right, so rejecting mortal sin is obvious, but rejection of venial sin extends that logic into every aspect of human life. So venial sin ought to be rejected. All right. So I'm not saying like go for it, it's a venial sin. I'm saying it ought to be rejected. But if you were to fall, in the sense that you couldn't devise ways of protecting those whom you were harboring as best you could, and you were to lie, that would be a venial sin. All right. But I think that you should try to devise ways, non-sinful ways of protecting those whom you harbor. All right. Obviously, you're already in a geopolitical situation which is terrible. Like, the world around you is falling down, and your government can't be trusted, and things are crazy town. So like when people ask me, what would you say? I just wouldn't answer the question. And like, well, wouldn't that evasion be noted, and wouldn't they inspect your house? I think you just come out firing and say like, listen, you're going to either come in my house or not come in my house. Do whatever the heck you want, because you've overrun my country. So God bless. Will I say it in exactly those terms? No. You try to cultivate a prudence which permits you to draw on, the Holy Spirit's inspiration and your own formation, like what you've learned from wise people, what you've experienced in your own life, like what you're able to think through at the actual instant or at the particular moment, and then to supply something which isn't sinful, right? To remain innocent as a dove, but crafty as a serpent. So yeah. I think that oftentimes you'll hear it said, our moral intuitions are strong on this and we should follow them. But at the end of the day, I think that we should follow the moral intuitions of the saints, right? We should follow the moral intuitions of the inspired authors of sacred scripture. We should follow the moral intuitions of, St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Thomas Aquinas, of St. John Henry Newman, because I think that they see more clearly the way in which this physical world is transparent to the spiritual world. And I think that it's in search of that world which we set out. So might this be thought naive? Sure, absolutely. Might this be thought like a little bit Pollyanna-ish? Okay. But I think that we should be working towards a solution rather than admitting that sin is somehow inevitable, because in so doing, we despair of the real prospect of the life of sanctity in its fullness, in its grandeur. And I think that life is really possible for us, and we should strive for it with our whole mind, heart, soul, and strength. All right, that's basically what I wanted to say. So this is Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe. Click the bell so that way you get email updates whenever Matt goes live or posts a video. Also, please check out Godsplaining, which is a podcast to which I contribute with 4 other Dominican friars. Short episodes, all things Catholic, accessible. It's like just kind of conversations about the Lord, conversations about the life of faith, all things. And then Godsplaining, we're actually having retreats this summer, so check those out at godsplaining.org. We have 2 in July and 1 in August, one for all comers, one for young adults, and one like a young men's wilderness retreat. So all kinds of good stuff there. And then I mentioned it at the top of the hour, but I wrote a book. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. I would encourage you to order it. And you'll find in there some sweet moral principles which are applicable in this conversation and beyond. All right, so that's it for me. My prayers are for you. Please pray for me, and I will catch you next time on Godsplaining. No, I will catch you on Pints with Aquinas. I'll catch you on both. I'm embarrassed. Okay, here we go.